I'm Sarah, 28, and I woke up in the ICU with a breathing tube down my throat and my sister's joke nearly killing me. The steady beep of machines surrounded me like a mechanical funeral march. My throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass, and every breath was a conscious effort that my body had forgotten how to do automatically. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt dismissed by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. The nurse checking my vitals had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. You gave everyone quite a scare, honey. Severe anaphylactic shock. Do you remember what happened? Oh, I remembered all right. Every painful detail of my sister Jessica's brilliant plan to prove I was faking my food allergies. Because apparently 28 years of carrying EpiPens and reading every ingredient label wasn't enough evidence for the Miller family jury. Let me back up and explain how we got to this charming family moment. Growing up, I was the family hypochondriac. At least that's what they called me every time I politely declined Aunt Martha's famous shrimp salad or asked if there were nuts in Uncle Bob's special brownies. My mother would roll her eyes and mutter about attention-seeking behavior. My father would launch into lectures about how kids these days are too pampered and how he ate everything as a child without any problems. Jessica, my older sister by 3 years, took particular delight in my dramatics. She'd wave shellfish in my face at family dinners, laughing when I'd back away. Come on, Sarah, just try a little bite. What's the worst that could happen? The worst, as it turned out, was exactly what happened last Tuesday night. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. See, my allergies weren't some mysterious condition that appeared overnight. I'd been diagnosed at age 6 after a terrifying incident with peanut butter cookies at a school party. My parents were present for that emergency room visit. They saw the hives, the swelling, the breathing difficulties. They met with the allergist who explained the severity of my condition. Yet somehow, by the time I reached high school, family lore had transformed my legitimate medical condition into Sarah's little quirks. She's always been dramatic, my mother would tell relatives. Gets it from her father's side. The irony was that I'd spent most of my life trying to be the opposite of dramatic. I learned to cook my own meals for family gatherings. I carried multiple EpiPens. I researched restaurants before we went anywhere. I never made a fuss when I had to eat a granola bar while everyone else enjoyed birthday cake. I became an expert at managing my own safety, while my family became experts at ignoring it. Jessica's engagement party last year was a perfect example of the Miller family's approach to my allergies. She'd hired a fancy caterer and planned this elaborate seafood buffet. When I called to ask about the menu, she laughed. Oh, Sarah, you can just eat the salad. There's always salad. Jess, I'm allergic to shellfish. If there's cross-contamination in the kitchen, God, you're so paranoid. Fine, I'll tell the caterer to make you a special plate. Happy now? I should have known better than to trust that promise. The night of the party, I arrived to find raw oysters, shrimp cocktail, crab cakes, and lobster bisque covering every surface. The special plate Jessica had promised was nowhere to be found. When I asked about it, she shrugged. They forgot. Just pick around the seafood stuff. It's not that hard. My soon-to-be brother-in-law, Ryan, looked uncomfortable. Jess, maybe we should call the caterer back. Ryan, please. Sarah's being ridiculous. She's never actually had a reaction at a family event. This whole allergy thing is just, you know how she is. That phrase. You know how she is. It had followed me through childhood, adolescence, and apparently into adulthood. It was shorthand for dramatic, attention-seeking, difficult. I ended up eating crackers in the car while my family celebrated inside. Through the window, I could see Jessica telling the story to her friends, probably explaining why the guest of honor sister was sitting outside like some kind of social pariah. But here's the thing that really got to me. It wasn't just the food. It was the pattern. Every family gathering became an exercise in testing my boundaries. How much would I tolerate before I finally snapped? How far could they push before I'd defend myself? Christmas dinner 2 years ago, my cousin brought a green bean casserole topped with almonds. When I politely declined, the interrogation began. What kind of nuts are you allergic to exactly? Aunt Linda demanded. Tree nuts, almonds, walnuts, pecans. But what about coconut? That's technically a nut. Coconut isn't actually... See? She doesn't even know what she's allergic to. This from my father, as if he'd caught me in some elaborate lie. The worst part wasn't their doubt. It was how they'd turned my medical condition into entertainment. They genuinely seemed to enjoy watching me navigate their little tests. There was something almost predatory about the way they'd watch my face when questionable food appeared. My mother once brought store-bought cookies to a family picnic and handed me the package with a sweet smile. These should be fine for you, honey. The ingredient list included, may contain tree nuts in bold letters. When I pointed this out, she frowned like I was being deliberately difficult. May contain isn't the same as contains. Sarah, you're being paranoid. That's when I realized they weren't just dismissive of my allergies. They genuinely believed I was lying. In their minds, I was an adult woman who had somehow maintained an elaborate deception for over 2 decades, carrying fake EpiPens and avoiding entire food groups just to, what? Get attention? Feel special? The logic never made sense, but then again, family rarely does. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing client proposals at my marketing firm. Sarah, I have the most amazing news. Jessica's voice practically vibrated through the phone. Ryan proposed. Jess, that's wonderful. Congratulations. We'd been expecting this for months. Ryan was the kind of guy who planned everything meticulously, and he'd been dropping hints about ring shopping since Valentine's Day. I want to celebrate properly, Jessica continued. I'm throwing an engagement party next Saturday. Nothing too fancy, just family and close friends. Can you help me plan it? I should have said no. Should have made up some excuse about being busy or having other plans. But Jessica was my sister, and despite everything, I wanted her to be happy. Of course. What did you have in mind? I was thinking we'd do it at Mom and Dad's house. Use the backyard, set up some tables. Ryan loves barbecue, so maybe we could grill. And I found this amazing recipe for shrimp skewers that would be perfect. My stomach dropped. Shrimp skewers? Don't start, Sarah. It's one dish among many. There will be plenty of other options. Jess, you know I can't be around shellfish being grilled. The smoke? The cross-contamination? Oh my God, seriously? You can't even be in the same yard as shrimp now? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The proteins become airborne when shellfish is grilled. My allergist specifically warned me about this. It's not paranoia, it's medical fact. Fine. We won't grill shrimp. Happy? Thank you. I really appreciate. We'll just serve them cold instead. Shrimp cocktail is classier anyway. And there it was. The same pattern playing out again. Jessica would make a show of accommodating my needs while finding a way to do exactly what she wanted anyway. Jess, it's not about how the shrimp is prepared. It's about cross-contamination. If shrimp is being prepared in the same kitchen as other food, Sarah, I am not planning my engagement party around your imaginary food issues. This is my day. For once in our lives, can you just not make everything about you? The accusation hit like a slap. Make everything about me? When have I ever? Always. You've been doing it since we were kids. Anytime there's a family celebration, you find some way to be the center of attention with your allergies and your drama and your special requirements. I stared at my computer screen, watching the cursor blink in the document I'd been editing. 28 years old, and my sister still saw me as the attention-seeking child she'd decided I was in elementary school. I'll bring my own food, I said quietly. Just please be careful about cross-contamination in the kitchen. Whatever makes you happy, Sarah. I'll talk to Mom about keeping your precious EpiPen nearby in case you decide to have one of your episodes. She hung up before I could respond. That night, I called my friend Lisa to vent. Lisa had been my college roommate and was one of the few people who'd actually witnessed one of my allergic reactions. She called them episodes? Lisa's voice was incredulous. Sarah, she was there when you went into shock at my birthday dinner sophomore year. She saw the paramedics. How can she still think you're faking? Because she wants to think I'm faking. It's easier than admitting they've been cruel to me for years. Are you sure you should go to this party? I wasn't sure about anything anymore. But Jessica was my sister, and some part of me still hoped that maybe this time would be different. Maybe seeing me genuinely happy for her success would soften something in her heart. Maybe I was the one living in a fantasy. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes you believe everything will work out fine. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a sundress Jessica had complimented before, and even doing my hair in the style she'd said looked so pretty on me at Easter. I wanted to be the supportive sister she deserved, allergies and all. I arrived at my parents' house early to help set up, bringing a cooler with my own food and a new EpiPen I'd picked up from the pharmacy that morning, just in case. The backyard looked beautiful. Jessica had strung lights between the trees, set up round tables with white tablecloths, and arranged bouquets of sunflowers as centerpieces. She'd clearly put thought into every detail. Sarah, you're here. She hugged me tight, and for a moment, everything felt normal between us. What do you think? It's gorgeous, Jess. Ryan's going to love it. Help me finish setting up the food table? The caterer just dropped everything off. We walked over to the buffet station, and I immediately felt my chest tighten. Shrimp cocktail occupied the center of the table, surrounded by various other dishes. The kitchen door was propped open, and I could smell the distinctive scent of seafood preparation still lingering in the air. Jess, I know what you're thinking, but I was super careful. I had them prepare your stuff first, before any of the seafood. Look. She pointed to a plate clearly labeled Sarah, sitting apart from the other dishes. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and that quinoa salad you like. No cross-contamination. I felt a surge of gratitude mixed with surprise. She'd actually listened. She'd actually taken precautions. Thank you, Thank you. You're my sister. She squeezed my shoulder. I want you to enjoy today. Guests began arriving around noon. Ryan's family, our cousins, family friends, co-workers. Jessica glowed as she introduced her fiancé, showing off her ring, accepting congratulations. I hung back, picking at my specially prepared plate, and genuinely enjoying watching her happiness. Everything was going perfectly until my cousin Mike made a comment about the shrimp cocktail. Jess, this is incredible. Where did you get these shrimp? Oh, that's Sarah's favorite too, Jessica said with a bright smile. She's been eyeing them all afternoon. I looked up from my quinoa salad, confused. What? The shrimp cocktail. You said how good it looked. No, I didn't. You know I can't eat shrimp. Jessica laughed, that particular laugh she used when she thought someone was being ridiculous. Come on, Sarah, stop being dramatic, it's just shrimp. The conversation around us quieted. I could feel people watching, waiting to see how this would play out. The familiar weight of being the family spectacle settled on my shoulders. Jess, I'm severely allergic to shellfish. You know this. Are you, though? Her voice carried that same tone she'd used when we were children, and she was about to prove I was lying about something. I mean, have you ever actually tried it? As an adult? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, family members exchanged glances. I could practically see them thinking the same thing Jessica was saying out loud. Maybe Sarah really had been faking all these years. I don't need to try poison to know it will hurt me, I said quietly. Poison? Jessica laughed again. It's shrimp cocktail, not cyanide. Everyone else here is eating it just fine. Ryan stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Jess, maybe we should… No, Ryan. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around Sarah's supposed allergies. Look at her. She's perfectly fine sitting 3 feet away from a plate of shrimp. If she was really that allergic, wouldn't she be having a reaction right now? The logic seemed sound to everyone watching. I could see it in their faces. Curiosity, doubt, and the dawning possibility that maybe the family skeptics had been right all along. Just try one bite, Jessica continued, picking up a shrimp from the cocktail ring. One tiny bite. Prove to us that you're really allergic. The crowd had formed a loose circle around us now. My parents, my aunts and uncles, Ryan's family, all watching to see if their suspicions would finally be confirmed. I'm not going to intentionally poison myself to satisfy your curiosity. See? Jessica turned to address the crowd. She won't even try, because she knows she's been lying. What happened next unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Jessica, emboldened by the crowd's attention and her absolute certainty that she was right, decided to take matters into her own hands. While I was explaining to my cousin Lisa why I couldn't just try a little bit, Jessica quietly walked over to my specially prepared plate. I didn't notice her adding anything to my food. Why would I? This was my sister, at her engagement party, after she'd specifically promised to keep me safe. When I returned to my plate, everything looked exactly as it had before. The grilled chicken, the roasted vegetables, the quinoa salad. I took a bite of the quinoa, talking with Ryan's sister about her new job, feeling grateful that the drama had passed. The first sign something was wrong came about 10 minutes later. A slight tingling in my mouth, like I'd eaten something too spicy. I excused myself to get some water, thinking maybe the vegetables had been seasoned more heavily than I'd realized. By the time I made it to the kitchen, the tingling had spread to my tongue and throat. My mouth felt swollen, and there was an odd metallic taste that I recognized with growing horror. I'd tasted it before, the last time I'd been exposed to shellfish. Jessica! I called out, my voice already sounding thick and strange. What did you put in my food? She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still smiling. What do you mean? My mouth is swelling. What did you add to my plate? Her smile faltered slightly. I didn't add anything. Jessica, I need to know right now. Did you put shellfish in my food? Maybe. Maybe just a tiny bit of shrimp. Like, practically microscopic. Just to prove… I didn't hear the rest of her sentence because I was already running for my purse, where I kept my EpiPen. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for it, and I could feel my throat starting to close. Sarah? Ryan's voice came from behind me. Are you okay? I turned around, and I must have looked as terrified as I felt because his expression immediately changed. Call 911, I managed to say, before jamming the EpiPen into my thigh. The next few minutes were chaos. Ryan was on the phone with emergency services while Jessica stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, still processing what was happening. It was just a tiny piece, she kept saying. Just a tiny piece. She's fine. Look, she's fine. But I wasn't fine. Despite the EpiPen, my breathing was becoming more labored. My face was swelling, and hives were breaking out across my arms and chest. The epinephrine had bought me time, but not enough. "Where's the ambulance?" Ryan demanded. "She's faking," Jessica said, her voice rising with panic. "She's doing this for attention. She took something to make herself look sick." "Jessica, shut up," Ryan snapped, and I'd never heard him use that tone with her before. The ambulance arrived just as my second EpiPen ran out, and my world started going dark around the edges. I remember being loaded onto a stretcher. Remember Jessica still insisting to anyone who would listen that this was all an elaborate performance. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was my mother saying, "Well, she certainly picked a dramatic time for this nonsense." Even as I was dying, they thought it was about attention. I woke up 18 hours later to the steady beep of machines and the antiseptic smell of hospital air. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming for hours. Every breath was deliberate and difficult. The ICU nurse, a middle-aged woman with gentle hands, explained what had happened. Severe anaphylactic shock, respiratory failure. They'd had to intubate me when my airway closed completely. "You're very lucky," she said. "A few more minutes and we might not have been able to help you." Lucky. That was one way to put it. I spent the first day alone. No flowers, no get-well cards, no family members anxiously waiting in the hallway. The nurses looked sorry for me, which somehow made it worse. Even strangers could see that something was wrong with this picture. "Are you sure there's no one you'd like us to call?" the day nurse asked gently. "My family knows where I am," I croaked. What I didn't say was that my family had collectively decided I'd ruined Jessica's engagement party with my dramatics. According to the text I received from my mother while I was still unconscious, they were disappointed in my behavior and thought I should consider the timing of my medical emergency. Apparently, nearly dying was inconsiderate. Ryan showed up on the second day looking haggard and guilty. He brought flowers, daisies, which were safe for people with allergies. Someone had done their research. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. "Like I got hit by a truck," I admitted. "How's Jessica?" His expression darkened, angry. "She's convinced you orchestrated this whole thing somehow. To what end? To make her look bad. To steal attention from her engagement." He rubbed his face tiredly. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you know there was shellfish in your food?" "No." The word came out flat and certain. If I'd known, I would have used my EpiPen immediately and called 911 myself. He nodded, looking relieved. "That's what I thought. That's what I told Jessica, but she what? She's telling people you must have taken something to fake the reaction. Some kind of drug or chemical that would mimic anaphylaxis." I stared at him, speechless. Even after watching me nearly die, Jessica was still committed to the theory that I was an elaborate fraud. "Ryan, do you know what I do for a living? You're in marketing, right?" "I'm a junior account executive at a small firm. I make $38,000 a year. Do you really think I have access to experimental pharmaceuticals that could perfectly mimic a severe allergic reaction?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "When you put it like that. Also, even if I did have access to something like that, why would I risk my life to prove a point? What could possibly be worth almost dying?" We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the machines keeping track of my vital signs. "I've been doing research," Ryan said finally. "About food allergies, anaphylaxis, the whole thing. Sarah, what happened to you? It's exactly what the medical literature describes. There's no way to fake the physical symptoms you experienced. You believe me. I always believed you, but now I have proof." He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. "This is Jessica adding shrimp to your quinoa salad." I took it without thinking, just because she looked like she was being sneaky about something. The photo showed Jessica clearly scraping shrimp from the cocktail ring into my food, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. The evidence was irrefutable. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I'm done pretending this is normal. What Jessica did, it's not a prank. It's not a joke. She could have killed you." I leaned back against my pillows, exhausted by the conversation and the implications of what he was telling me. "What are you going to do?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I love her, but I can't marry someone who would deliberately harm her own sister and then blame the victim. This changes everything." After he left, I lay in my hospital bed and thought about the photo on his phone. Proof. Finally, indisputable proof that I wasn't lying, wasn't exaggerating, wasn't seeking attention. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like the end of my family as I'd known it. The official-looking envelope arrived at Jessica's apartment exactly 2 weeks after I was discharged from the hospital. I know this because Ryan called me immediately after it happened, his voice shaking with something that sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. "Sarah, you need to know what just happened." I was sitting in my own apartment, still recovering from what the doctors had politely called a significant medical event. My throat was finally back to normal, and the hives had faded, but I was still dealing with fatigue and what my physician described as post-traumatic stress from the near-death experience. "What's wrong?" I asked, though honestly, I wasn't sure I could handle any more drama. A process server just showed up at Jessica's door, official court documents, and he paused, and I could hear papers rustling. A hospital bill for $180,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on recovering that I hadn't even thought about the cost of my ICU stay. 18 hours in intensive care, emergency intubation, multiple medications, specialist consultations. Of course it was going to be expensive. $180,000? I repeated numbly. That's not even the worst part. The documents include a formal complaint for assault and battery. "Sarah, they're pressing criminal charges against Jessica for poisoning you." I sank into my couch, trying to process what he was telling me. "I didn't file any charges." "You didn't have to. The hospital was legally required to report it when they realized what happened. Apparently, deliberately exposing someone to a known allergen falls under assault laws. Who knew? Who knew indeed? Certainly not Jessica, who had probably thought the worst consequence of her little prank would be some family awkwardness and maybe an apology. How is she taking it? Not well. She's been on the phone with Mom and Dad for the last hour, crying about how this is all a misunderstanding and you're probably behind it somehow." There it was again. Even faced with legal documents and a 6-figure hospital bill, Jessica was still convinced this was all part of my elaborate attention-seeking scheme. The cognitive dissonance would have been impressive if it wasn't so destructive. "Ryan, I want you to know that I didn't ask for any of this. I never wanted things to go this far. Sarah." His voice was gentle but firm. "What Jessica did to you was attempted murder. Maybe she didn't mean to kill you, but she deliberately gave you something she knew could harm you. In most states, that's a felony." The word hung between us. Felony. My sister was potentially facing felony charges because she couldn't accept that my allergies were real. What happens now? Now Jessica has to decide whether she wants to fight this in court or try to plea bargain. Either way, she's looking at criminal charges, civil liability for the hospital bills, and probably a restraining order. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you've ever dealt with family members who refuse to believe your medical conditions are real. After I hung up with Ryan, I sat in my apartment and tried to figure out how I felt about these developments. Part of me was relieved that someone was finally taking what happened seriously. The hospital, the police, the legal system, they all recognized that what Jessica had done was criminal, but another part of me felt oddly empty. This wasn't the vindication I'd imagined. I'd never wanted my sister to face jail time or financial ruin. I just wanted her to believe me, to stop treating my medical condition like a character flaw. Now, instead of getting an apology or acknowledgement, I was getting revenge. And revenge, it turned out, felt a lot more complicated than I'd expected. Jessica's strategy for dealing with the legal crisis was, unfortunately, exactly what I should have expected from someone who'd spent years refusing to accept responsibility for her actions. She decided to blame Ryan. The call came 3 days after the court documents were served. I was heating up soup for lunch when my phone rang, and Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Sarah, we need to talk." Her voice was different, shaky, desperate, with none of the confident dismissiveness that usually characterized our conversations. "About what, Jessica?" "About this whole misunderstanding. The hospital bills, the legal stuff. I think we can work this out without involving lawyers." I set down my spoon and leaned against the kitchen counter. "Work what out exactly?" "Look, I never meant for you to get that sick. You have to believe me. It was supposed to be a harmless prank, just to prove that your allergies weren't as serious as you claimed. You nearly killed me." "That's what I'm trying to explain. Ryan talked me into it. He's the one who suggested putting shrimp in your food. He said it would be funny, that it would finally expose your lies." I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. What? The whole thing was his idea. I never would have done something so cruel on my own. But he kept pushing, saying things like, "Your sister has been manipulating this family for years, and someone needs to call her bluff." The lies were so elaborate, so detailed, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memory of events. Had Ryan been involved? Had I misread his guilt and concern? Then I remembered the photo he'd shown me, the one where Jessica was clearly acting alone, glancing around to make sure no one was watching as she tampered with my food. Jessica, that's not what happened. Yes, it is. Ask anyone who was there. Ryan was the one pushing for you to try the shrimp. He was the one making jokes about your fake allergies. I was just trying to make my fiancé happy. The manipulation was breathtaking. Jessica had constructed an alternate version of reality where she was the victim of Ryan's manipulation, rather than the architect of my near-death experience. If that's true, why didn't you tell the police this when they questioned you? Because I was protecting him. I thought we could work through it privately. But now, with these criminal charges and the hospital bills, Sarah, I can't go to jail for something that wasn't my idea. I closed my eyes and tried to summon patience I didn't feel. Jessica, there are witnesses. There are photos. Ryan has evidence that you acted alone. Ryan has photos? Photos of what? I realized my mistake immediately. I just told Jessica that evidence of her guilt existed, evidence she hadn't known about. Sarah, what photos? What kind of evidence? I have to go, I said, and hung up before she could respond. Within an hour, Ryan was calling me, and he sounded furious. Jessica just accused me of masterminding the whole thing, he said without preamble. She called my mother, my boss, and half the wedding party to tell them I manipulated her into poisoning you. Ryan, I'm so sorry. I accidentally mentioned that you had photos. It doesn't matter what you said. This is who she is, Sarah. When things get difficult, Jessica finds someone else to blame. She's throwing me under the bus to save herself. I could hear the pain in his voice, and it occurred to me that Ryan was experiencing the same disillusionment I'd been living with for years. The person he thought he knew, kind, funny, loving Jessica, was revealing herself to be someone capable of stunning cruelty when cornered. Are you okay? No, I'm not okay. I'm engaged to someone who tried to kill her sister and then tried to frame me for it. This isn't who I thought I was marrying. The conversation that followed was painful and necessary. Ryan described the fight he and Jessica had after the legal documents arrived, how she'd first blamed me for overreacting to her harmless prank, then shifted to blaming him when she realized the legal consequences were real. She actually suggested that we both claim you poisoned yourself to make her look bad. She wanted me to testify that you seemed suspicious before the party, like you were planning something. The depth of Jessica's denial was staggering. Even now, faced with criminal charges and overwhelming evidence, she was still more committed to proving me wrong than to accepting responsibility for her actions. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm ending the engagement. I can't marry someone who would do this to her own family and then lie about it. And Sarah, I'm going to testify for you. Whatever you need to prove what really happened, I'll provide it. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about how completely Jessica had misplayed her hand. If she'd simply apologized, if she'd shown genuine remorse and taken responsibility, she might have been able to minimize the legal consequences. Instead, her desperate attempts to avoid blame had cost her her fiancé and any remaining credibility. Sometimes the cover-up really is worse than the crime. The courthouse was exactly what you'd expect from a building designed to intimidate people. Marble floors, high ceilings, and that particular echo that makes every whispered conversation sound ominous. I'd never been in a courtroom before, and I found myself fighting the urge to apologize for existing, which seemed like exactly the wrong energy to bring to my own legal proceeding. Ryan met me outside the building, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a dark suit that made him seem older and more serious than the man who'd helped plan Jessica's engagement party just weeks earlier. How are you holding up? He asked. Honestly, I keep expecting to wake up and discover this is all an elaborate nightmare. He smiled grimly. I know the feeling. 6 weeks ago I was planning a wedding. Now I'm here to testify against my ex-fiancé in a criminal assault case. The words sounded surreal even as he said them. This wasn't how normal family disputes were supposed to be resolved. We walked into the courthouse together, and I caught sight of my family clustered near the defendant's table. My parents, Jessica, my Aunt Linda, and my cousin Mike, all of them looking like they were attending a funeral rather than a legal proceeding. Jessica looked awful. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. When she saw me, her expression shifted through several emotions: guilt, anger, desperation, and finally a hard resolve that I recognized from our childhood arguments. She was still planning to fight this. My parents' reaction was more predictable. Mom gave me the look she'd perfected during my teenage years, disappointed but not surprised that I'd somehow managed to embarrass the family again. Dad avoided eye contact entirely, probably still convinced that I'd orchestrated this whole situation for attention. The preliminary hearing was supposed to determine whether there was enough evidence to proceed with criminal charges. Jessica's lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman who'd probably cost my parents their retirement savings, argued that the incident was a misunderstanding between sisters, a prank gone wrong that didn't rise to the level of criminal assault. Your Honor, Miss Miller never intended to cause serious harm to her sister. She was operating under the mistaken belief that Sarah's alleged allergies were exaggerated or fabricated, a belief shared by multiple family members who will testify that Sarah had never experienced a serious allergic reaction in their presence. The prosecutor, a tired-looking man in his 50s, countered with medical evidence. He presented my hospital records, the emergency room physician's testimony about the severity of my reaction, and expert testimony about anaphylaxis and the potential for fatal outcomes. Your Honor, regardless of the defendant's intent, she deliberately administered a known allergen to someone with documented medical allergies. The fact that she believed those allergies were fabricated doesn't change the fact that her actions nearly resulted in the victim's death. Then came Ryan's testimony. He took the stand with quiet dignity, answering questions about the events of that day in a clear, factual tone that left no room for interpretation. He described watching Jessica tamper with my food, the photo he'd taken, my immediate medical distress, and the family's reaction to my emergency. Did the defendant express any remorse or concern when the victim began showing signs of distress? The prosecutor asked. No, she did not. Even as Sarah was obviously having trouble breathing, Jessica insisted that she was faking the reaction for attention. And what was your response to this? I called 911. Jessica tried to stop me, saying I was overreacting and that Sarah was just being dramatic. The courtroom was completely silent as Ryan described the ambulance ride, my loss of consciousness, and the 18 hours I'd spent in intensive care fighting for my life. Jessica's lawyer tried to discredit Ryan during cross-examination, suggesting that his testimony was influenced by their recent breakup and his desire for revenge. But Ryan's calm, consistent answers and the photographic evidence made it impossible to dismiss his account. Mr. Patterson, isn't it true that you've been romantically involved with the alleged victim since ending your engagement to the defendant? No, ma'am, that's absolutely false. But you did end your engagement specifically because of this incident? I ended my engagement because I discovered that the woman I planned to marry was capable of deliberately harming her sister, and then lying about it to avoid consequences. The hearing lasted 3 hours, but the outcome was clear before the judge even rendered her decision. There was overwhelming evidence that Jessica had knowingly and deliberately exposed me to a substance she knew I was allergic to, and that her actions had resulted in life-threatening injuries. The court finds sufficient evidence to proceed with criminal charges, the judge announced. The defendant will be arraigned next Tuesday on charges of assault in the second degree. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Jessica crying into my mother's shoulder, while my father spoke animatedly with her lawyer. They were already planning their next move, probably trying to figure out how to minimize the financial and legal consequences of Jessica's actions. What struck me most was how completely absent I was from their calculations. Even now, they were treating this like something that had happened to Jessica, not something Jessica had done to me. Some things apparently never change. The investigation that followed the preliminary hearing revealed something I hadn't expected, a documented pattern of family behavior that went far beyond simple doubt about my allergies. Detective Martinez, the officer assigned to the case, contacted me 2 weeks after the hearing to discuss what they'd discovered during their investigation. Ms. Miller, we've been interviewing witnesses from the engagement party, and several concerning patterns have emerged, she said, settling into the chair across from my coffee table. This wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. Your family has a history of deliberately exposing you to allergens. I set down my tea, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with allergies. What do you mean? Detective Martinez opened a notepad filled with careful handwriting. We spoke with your cousin Lisa, who mentioned a Christmas dinner where your aunt deliberately served you food containing nuts after you'd specifically asked about the ingredients. The memory came flooding back. Christmas 3 years ago, when Aunt Linda had insisted her green bean casserole was perfectly safe, despite the obvious almond slivers on top. I'd ended up in the emergency room that night with hives and breathing difficulties. Then there's the incident at your brother's graduation party, where your mother allegedly replaced your safe cookies with ones containing dairy after you'd left them unattended. I remembered that too, though I'd convinced myself at the time that it was an accident, a mix-up in the kitchen during party preparation. Ms. Miller, how many times have you been hospitalized for allergic reactions following family gatherings? I had to think about it. 4 times in the past 5 years. And how many times have you been hospitalized following non-family events? None. Never. Detective Martinez nodded grimly. That's what we thought. According to the hospital records we've subpoenaed, all of your serious allergic reactions have occurred after family gatherings where you specifically informed multiple people about your allergies. The implications hit me like a truck. This wasn't about Jessica's singular poor judgment. This was about a sustained pattern of family behavior that bordered on systematic abuse. Are you saying they've been deliberately poisoning me for years? I'm saying the evidence suggests a pattern of behavior that goes beyond mere negligence. Your family has consistently exposed you to known allergens despite repeated warnings about the potential consequences. The detective explained that they'd found text message threads between family members discussing my fake allergies and joking about ways to test whether my reactions were genuine. Apparently, Jessica's shrimp incident wasn't a spontaneous prank. It was the culmination of years of family discussions about how to expose me. We've also discovered that your family has been advising each other on how to avoid liability for your medical expenses. There are emails discussing whether your health insurance would cover self-inflicted allergic reactions. I stared at her, speechless. While I'd been fighting for my life in emergency rooms, my family had been calculating how to avoid paying for the consequences of their actions. Detective Martinez, what does this mean legally? It means we're expanding the charges. Jessica is still facing assault charges for the specific incident at the engagement party. But we're also investigating your parents and other family members for conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and potentially attempted fraud. The word conspiracy hung in the air between us. My family hadn't just doubted my allergies, they'd actively conspired to test them, regardless of the risk to my health and safety. There's something else, Detective Martinez continued. We found evidence that your family has been discussing ways to discredit you if legal action arose. There are discussions about having you declared mentally incompetent, claims that your allergies are symptoms of Munchausen syndrome, and plans to argue that you've been self-inducing reactions for attention. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I found myself laughing. Not from humor, but from the sheer absurdity of discovering that my own family had been treating me like an enemy for years. Ms. Miller, I need to ask you a difficult question. Are you prepared for this investigation to potentially result in criminal charges against multiple family members? I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to accommodate their disbelief. All the family gatherings I'd attended despite knowing they might end with me in the hospital. All the times I'd apologized for having medical needs that inconvenienced them. Detective, I'm prepared for whatever needs to happen. I'm tired of being poisoned by people who are supposed to love me. She nodded and closed her notepad. We'll be in touch as the investigation progresses. In the meantime, I'd recommend avoiding contact with any family members who might be involved. After she left, I sat in my apartment and tried to process what I'd learned. My family hadn't just doubted me. They'd actively conspired to harm me, documented their plans to avoid consequences, and prepared strategies to destroy my credibility if their actions were exposed. The people who were supposed to protect me had spent years treating me like a science experiment. And now, finally, they were going to face consequences for it. The call from my mother came at 7 in the morning, 3 weeks after the expanded investigation began. I'd been expecting it, honestly. The combination of criminal charges, potential civil liability, and frozen assets had a way of clarifying family priorities. Sarah, we need to talk. Her voice carried that particular tone I remembered from childhood, the one that meant I was about to be lectured about my inappropriate behavior and given instructions on how to fix the situation I'd created. About what, Mom? About this ridiculous legal nonsense. It's gone far enough. It's time for you to call off your lawyers and stop this vindictive campaign against your own family. I sat up in bed, immediately wide awake. Vindictive campaign? Don't play innocent with us, Sarah. We know you orchestrated this whole thing to get back at Jessica for her engagement party, but now you've gone too far. Your father could lose his job over these charges. The victim blaming was so audacious that I almost admired it. Somehow, my family had convinced themselves that being investigated for deliberately poisoning me was actually an attack on them. Mom, I didn't orchestrate anything. Jessica poisoned me, and the legal system is holding her accountable. Poisoned is a very strong word, Sarah. It was a harmless prank that you blew completely out of proportion. And now, because of your overreaction, your entire family is facing financial ruin. I got out of bed and walked to my kitchen, needing coffee for this conversation. Financial ruin? The legal fees alone are going to bankrupt us. Your father's had to mortgage the house to pay for Jessica's attorney. We've had to borrow money from your uncle just to cover basic expenses. And now the lawyers are talking about civil liability that could cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. There it was. This wasn't about justice or family reconciliation. This was about money. Mom, what exactly do you want me to do? Drop the charges. Settle out of court. Tell the prosecutors this was all a misunderstanding and you don't want to pursue it further. I poured coffee into my mug and considered her request. And in exchange? In exchange, we don't sue you for the emotional distress you've caused this family. We don't pursue legal action for the false claims you've made about deliberate poisoning. And we don't have you evaluated for the mental health issues that are clearly driving this vindictive behavior. The threat was crystal clear. Drop the charges, or face a counterattack designed to destroy my credibility and potentially my freedom. You want to sue me for being poisoned? We want to seek justice for the lies you've told and the damage you've done to innocent people's lives. Sarah, Jessica could go to prison because of your false accusations. Your father could lose his career. Is your need for attention really worth destroying your entire family? I took a sip of coffee and marveled at her ability to reframe attempted murder as a cry for attention. What lies? Specifically? The lies about us deliberately exposing you to allergens. The lies about family conspiracies. The lies about us discussing your medical expenses. You've created this elaborate victim fantasy, and now real people are suffering because of your delusions. Mom, the police have evidence. Text messages, emails, medical records. Circumstantial evidence that's being misinterpreted by people who don't understand our family dynamic. Sarah, we've been patient with your allergies and your drama for years. We've accommodated your special dietary needs. We've carried your EpiPens. We've rushed you to hospitals when you've had your episodes. And this is how you repay us? The rewriting of history was breathtaking. In her version of events, my family were long-suffering saints who'd nobly endured my difficult medical needs, only to be viciously attacked by an ungrateful daughter seeking revenge. I'm not dropping the charges, Mom. Then you're making a terrible mistake. We have evidence too, Sarah. Evidence that you've been exaggerating your allergies for years. Evidence that you've been manipulating medical professionals. Evidence that this whole situation is the result of severe psychological issues that need to be addressed professionally. The threat was clear. Cooperate or be destroyed. What kind of evidence? Medical records showing that your allergy test results have been inconsistent. Witness testimony about times when you've been exposed to allergens without reacting. Documentation of your attention-seeking behavior throughout your childhood and adolescence. I realized they were planning to use my medical history against me, probably arguing that any inconsistencies in my test results or variations in reaction severity proved that I was faking everything. Mom, I'm not dropping the charges. What Jessica did was criminal and I'm not going to help you cover it up. Then you're choosing strangers over family. And when this destroys everyone you're supposed to love, remember that you had a choice. She hung up, and I stood in my kitchen holding my coffee mug and processing what had just happened. My family was preparing for total war, and they were planning to use my medical condition as a weapon against me. 2 hours later, my lawyer called with an update that changed everything. Sarah, you need to know that your family just filed a countersuit claiming that you've been fraudulently collecting insurance money for fake medical emergencies. They're asking for reimbursement of all medical expenses they've incurred on your behalf, plus damages for emotional distress. Can they do that? They can try. But Sarah, they've made a critical tactical error. By filing this countersuit, they've opened themselves up to discovery. We can now subpoena all of their communications, financial records, and medical consultations. And what we found in the initial review is devastating to their case. What did you find? Detailed planning documents for what they called allergy tests. Medical research about how to induce specific types of reactions. And most damning of all, insurance fraud involving false claims that your medical emergencies were self-inflicted to avoid paying your hospital bills. I sank into my couch, overwhelmed by the scope of their deception. They've been committing insurance fraud? For years, apparently. Every time you were hospitalized after a family gathering, they filed claims stating that your reactions were either self-induced or the result of your own negligence. They've collected thousands of dollars in reimbursements while simultaneously planning the incidents that caused your hospitalizations. The pieces were falling into place now. My family hadn't just been testing my allergies for entertainment, they'd been orchestrating medical emergencies and then profiting from the insurance claims while positioning themselves as victims of my reckless behavior. What happens now? Now they're facing federal charges for insurance fraud in addition to the state charges for assault and conspiracy. Their countersuit has backfired spectacularly, and they're looking at potential prison time and massive financial penalties. After I hung up with my lawyer, I sat in my apartment and tried to figure out how I felt about this latest development. My family had gone from poisoning me to trying to destroy me legally, and in the process, they'd exposed themselves to far more serious consequences than Jessica's original assault charges. They'd played a dangerous game and lost catastrophically, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something that might have been justice. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, one with better security and no spare keys distributed to family members, when the final court documents arrived. The legal proceedings had concluded with a resolution that nobody could have predicted when this all started. Jessica pled guilty to assault in the second degree and was sentenced to 18 months probation, community service, and mandatory restitution for my medical expenses. My parents pled no contest to conspiracy and insurance fraud charges, receiving suspended sentences conditional on paying back the fraudulent insurance claims and covering my ongoing medical costs. The total financial judgment was $193,000. The original hospital bill plus legal fees, ongoing medical expenses, and restitution for the years of fraudulent insurance claims they'd filed. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was the official acknowledgement that what had happened to me was criminal, not familial dysfunction. The court had recognized that deliberately exposing someone to known allergens wasn't a prank or a family quirk. It was assault. Ryan called that evening to check on how I was processing the final resolution. "How are you feeling about it all?" he asked. "Relieved, mostly. It's finally over. Any regrets about how things ended up?" I considered the question seriously. I regret that it had to get to this point. I regret that my family chose legal warfare over taking responsibility for their actions. But I don't regret protecting myself or holding them accountable. For what it's worth, I think you handled this with more grace than I would have. Ryan had become an unexpected friend through this whole process. Not romantically, we'd both been clear about that boundary, but as someone who understood what it was like to discover that people you loved were capable of stunning cruelty when cornered. "Have you heard from any of them since the sentencing?" he asked. Radio silence. According to my cousin Mike, the family consensus is that I'm dead to them. Apparently, choosing legal accountability over family loyalty makes me a traitor to everything the Miller family stands for. How do you feel about that? Honestly, free. I looked around my apartment, noting how different it felt from any place I'd lived before. For the first time in my life, I don't have to worry about whether my food is safe. I don't have to carry multiple EpiPens to family gatherings. I don't have to justify my medical needs to people who are supposed to love me. That sounds like a gift. The best gift I've ever received. Actually, I just wish it hadn't taken criminal charges and a federal investigation for me to get it. We talked for another hour about his new job, my plans to travel somewhere other than hospitals, and the strange experience of building adult friendships with people who believed basic facts about your health. After we hung up, I made myself dinner, a simple pasta dish with ingredients I'd chosen without consulting anyone else's preferences or dietary restrictions. As I cooked, I thought about the irony of the situation. My family's attempt to prove I was faking my allergies had ended up providing more documentation of their reality than I could have achieved in decades of careful medical management. The court records now contained expert testimony about the severity of my allergies, detailed medical evidence of the harm caused by repeated exposures, and official recognition that my family's behavior constituted criminal assault. Anyone who doubted my condition could simply read the public court documents. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is your cousin Emma. I hope you're doing okay. A lot of us had no idea what was really happening. I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner." Similar messages had been trickling in for weeks. Extended family members, family friends, even some of my parents' neighbors had reached out privately to express support or share their own concerns about my family's treatment of my medical needs. Apparently, more people had noticed the pattern than I'd realized. Not everyone had cut me off. Some relationships would survive this, rebuilt on foundations of honesty rather than accommodation. As I finished my dinner, I thought about something my lawyer had said during our final meeting. "Sarah, you didn't destroy your family. Your family destroyed themselves by choosing cruelty over compassion. You just refused to enable it anymore." She was right. I hadn't caused this crisis by having medical needs. I hadn't escalated it by expecting basic safety from people who claimed to love me. And I hadn't ended it by holding people accountable for their criminal actions. I'd simply stopped accepting unacceptable treatment, and everything that followed had been the natural consequence of other people's choices. For the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep without wondering whether tomorrow would bring another family gathering where I'd have to choose between social inclusion and physical safety. The people who were supposed to protect me had spent years treating me like an enemy, but now I was surrounded by people, friends, medical professionals, even former in-laws, who treated my health as something worth protecting rather than something worth testing. Family, it turned out, wasn't defined by blood or obligation. It was defined by people who cared whether you lived or died, and who would never deliberately put your life at risk for their own entertainment. I'd lost a family, but I'd gained something better: peace, safety, and the knowledge that I was worth protecting. Sometimes justice isn't revenge. Sometimes it's just the absence of people who hurt you, and the presence of people who don't. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength when family becomes the enemy. And remember, you're never obligated to set yourself on fire to keep cruel people warm.